Some moments don't just test a person's strength, they reveal it. On that brightly lit stage, Ivanka Trump tried to paint Jasmine Crockett as an outsider, her words laced with mockery. The room immediately grew tense, a palpable uncertainty hanging in the air. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, nor did she lose her composure. Dead, she posed a single question, just one that left everyone in the room utterly speechless. The studio buzzed with a vibrant energy. Bright lights beamed down from above, reflecting off the polished desk at the stage's center. Cameras swept across the room, capturing the eager faces of the live audience. People leaned forward in their seats, whispering excitedly, waiting for the show to truly begin. On one side of the table sat Ivanka Trump. Her posture was impeccable, her smile a practiced curve, her presence radiating a serene calm. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years in the relentless glare of the spotlight. Dressed in a sharp, tailored outfit, she embodied an image of power and polish. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, a rising political voice, determined, outspoken, and unapologetically herself. She didn't wear the same guarded smile. Instead, her expression was steady, her eyes alert, her hands resting calmly before her. She knew she was stepping into a space where the odds were stacked, but she also understood precisely why she was there between them. The host sat, shuffling his stack of notes nervously. He attempted to keep things light, smiling a little too widely, almost as if he sensed the storm brewing beneath the surface. His initial questions were simple enough. Ladies, thank you for being here tonight. We're talking about some of the biggest challenges facing the country, but before we get too heavy, how's your week been? A soft chuckle rippled through the audience, was polite small talk designed purely to break the ice. Ivanka nodded, offering a short, well-rehearsed answer about family balance and the importance of staying grounded, the kind of answer she had delivered countless times before. Jasmine responded with a warmer, more direct smile, mentioning her dedicated work, the community she serves, and the vital importance of using platforms like this to bring real voices to the table. The audience nodded, some clapping lightly. For a few fleeting moments, it felt normal, calm. Two women living two vastly different lives sat at the same table, exchanging words under the studio lights. Yet beneath that veneer of calm, a powerful tension was building. This wasn't just a talk show. Wasn't just another polite political chat. For Ivanka, it was an opportunity to hold her ground, to remind the audience of her family's enduring power and presence. For Jasmine, it was a chance to challenge privilege, to break through a wall that had historically silenced so many voices. The audience might not have realized it yet, but they were sitting on the precipice of a clash that would not end with polite smiles. The host then moved to his next question. Let's start with the big picture. What do you see as the most urgent issue facing Americans right now? Ivanka spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured, almost perfectly rehearsed. She spoke of stability, tradition, and the paramount importance of leadership. She chose her words with meticulous care, every sentence polished to a gleaming perfection. She understood that cameras captured every detail, and she knew precisely how to perform for that lens. Then Jasmine spoke. Her voice was firm, brimming with conviction. She didn't sugarcoat her message. She didn't overpolish her delivery. She spoke of fairness, of opportunity, of the often ignored voices of ordinary people. She didn't glance at the cameras. Instead, she looked directly at Ivanka, then swept her gaze to the audience as if to remind them that this moment was profoundly real, not just another performance. The contrast was stark. On one side, controlled poise, on the other, raw authenticity. The audience sensed it, and the host felt it, too. There was a quiet electrical charge in the air, a spark waiting to ignite. The small talk had vanished. The politeness was rapidly fading. Something significant was about to happen. Something that would transform this calm stage into a battlefield of words. And when it did, it wouldn't just be about politics. It would be intensely personal. The calm was shattered. The polite smiles, the measured words, the soft laughter from the audience, all of it began to crack the moment Ivanka Trump leaned forward. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly at first. Gone was the relaxed posture, the effortless grace. Instead, her shoulders angled slightly toward Jasmine Crockett. Her eyes narrowed and her lips curved into a smile utterly devoid of warmth, calculated and chilling. The host, still clutching his cue cards, was mid-sentence when Ivanka interrupted. Her tone suddenly sharper. The warmth drained from her voice, replaced by something far more cutting. And then, with a voice steady but dripping with pure condescension, she uttered the words that sent a chill through the entire studio. Why don't you first go to Africa and try to understand things there? The ensuing silence was absolute. Every sound in the studio vanished. The audience froze, unsure if they had heard her correctly. A few people exchanged wide-eyed glances, mouth slightly agape. The host's pen slipped from his hand and clattered loudly against the desk. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a polite redirection. It was a dismissal, a sharp mocking remark designed to push Jasmine aside, reducing her presence to something foreign, something unwelcome. The unspoken understanding was clear to everyone in that room. This wasn't about Africa. It was about control. It was about making Jasmine feel small, making her feel like she didn't belong at that table. It was about silencing her before she could even truly take the stage. The weight of Ivanka's words hung in the air like a heavy, oppressive curtain. The audience murmured nervously. Some frowned while others let out sharp exhales, trying to process what had just happened. The host stared at Ivanka, his smile faltering, caught between his duty to keep the show moving and the undeniable transgression that had just occurred on his stage. His lips parted as if to say something, but no words escaped. Meanwhile, Ivanka settled back in her chair, her expression cool and composed as though she hadn't just thrown gasoline onto the set. Her confidence seemed to swell in the silence, bolstered by the notion that her words had landed without resistance. But then the camera cut to Jasmine Crockett, and the narrative instantly changed. She didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even stir in her seat. She simply sat there, steady, calm, her gaze locked on Ivanka as if meticulously measuring her opponent. In that silence, that uncomfortable stillness which Ivanka had tried to claim now unmistakably belonged to Jasmine. The audience noticed. The host noticed. For the first time that evening, Ivanka seemed to lose control of the room even though she was the one who had spoken last. Because everyone was waiting to see how Jasmine would respond. And they knew this wasn't just another back and forth political jab. This was something far weightier, something deeply personal, something that dug into the very fabric of identity, belonging, and respect. The tension grew thicker, almost suffocating with every passing second. The camera zoomed closer, capturing Jasmine's unwavering stillness, contrasting it with Ivanka's thin, brittle smile. The audience could almost feel the electricity building. A palpable charge in the air. Something was about to snap. Ivanka's intention had been to cut Jasmine down, to shake her, to make her shrink in her seat. But instead, she had inadvertently set the stage for something far more potent. Come back so incisive, it would leave the entire room breathless. And in that moment, even before she uttered a single word, Jasmine Crockett had already held all the power. The studio remained frozen. Ivanka's words still hung in the air, heavy and accurate like smoke after a sudden fire. The audience shifted uneasily in their seats, waiting for Jasmine Crockett to break the oppressive silence. But Jasmine neither rushed nor snapped back. She didn't throw her hands up in outrage. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Ivanka, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched agonizingly long, prompting some in the audience to wonder, is she shaken? Is she searching for words? The camera zoomed in closer, capturing every detail. Jasmine's slow, steady breathing, her unwavering gaze, the slight tilt of her head, and then slowly she leaned forward. Her voice sliced through the silence, not loud, not rushed, but precise. So tell me, Ivanka, is Donald Trump your father or your husband? The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped in a collective intake of breath. Some people slapped their hands over their mouths. Others widened their eyes, whispering furiously to the person next to them. The host blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as if disconnected, unsure whether to stop the show or simply let it unfold. Ivanka's face stiffened. Her polished smile flickered for the briefest second, a hairline crack appearing in her composure. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She paused, allowing the full weight of her initial question to sink in, and then added ... because this constant shade just feels misplaced. The ensuing silence was different. It was Jasmine's now. The audience knew precisely the unspoken history she referenced. They had heard the old clips, read the interviews. They remembered Donald Trump's comments about Ivanka. Comments that had long blurred the line between fatherly pride and something far more uncomfortable. Jasmine's words had expertly dragged those uncomfortable shadows back into the spotlight right here live in front of everyone. And she had done it without once raising her voice, without losing her composure, without resorting to a single insult. Just one perfectly aimed razor-sharp question. Ivanka shifted in her seat, forcing a brittle laugh, trying desperately to brush it off. But the crack in her carefully constructed armor was undeniably visible. The audience saw it. The cameras saw it. Jasmine saw it. Because in that single pivotal moment, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. What was supposed to embarrass Jasmine had backfired spectacularly. What was meant to cut her down had instead lifted her higher. Even the host sensed it. He glanced nervously between the two women. His notes lay forgotten. He knew the show had completely slipped from his grasp. And the audience, they couldn't look away. They were leaning forward, eyes locked on Jasmine, waiting to see if she would press further. But Jasmine didn't need to. Her single line had done all the work. In barely 14 seconds, she had completely flipped the dynamics of the entire room. The burden of tension had lifted from her shoulders. It now rested squarely on Ivanka's. With each passing second, Ivanka's silence felt heavier, and her desperate attempts to recover felt weaker. Jasmine, meanwhile, settled back in her chair, once again, serene, as if nothing extraordinary had just transpired. But the audience knew better. They had just witnessed a turning point. A moment where the underdog seized the spotlight, held it firm, and refused to let go. With just one incisive question, Jasmine Crockett had proven she wasn't merely another guest on a talk show, that she was the voice the room simply couldn't ignore. The silence following Jasmine's comeback was almost too heavy to bear. The camera zoomed in on Ivanka Trump, and for the first time that evening, she was clearly not in control. Her smile flickered, her polished expression visibly cracked, and her eyes darted briefly to the audience as if searching for a lifeline. But the audience wasn't with her anymore. They were unequivocally with Jasmine. You could feel it in the way people leaned forward in the hushed whispers rippling through the crowd. They were no longer watching Ivanka command the stage. They were watching her struggle desperately to hold it. Ivanka forced a small, brittle laugh, the kind people give when they're pretending not to be shaken. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and tried to reclaim the room with the same calm authority she had projected earlier. "Look," she said with a coolness that felt more fragile than firm. "All I'm saying is that maybe Jasmine should go to Africa to really understand things better." The words sounded hollow. What was sharp and pointed the first time now felt like a desperate echo, a weak attempt to shift the spotlight away from the question she had pointedly avoided. They murmured again, this time not in shock, but in patent disbelief. Some shook their heads, others crossed their arms, unimpressed. The air had shifted irrevocably. The momentum of Ivanka once commanded was gone, and every new word she uttered only made her situation worse. "'Cause Jasmine's line, "Is he your father or your husband?" didn't just land in that moment. It carried decades of weight. It dragged with it years of uncomfortable comments from Donald Trump that the public hadn't forgotten. People remembered him on The View in 2006, joking about dating Ivanka if she weren't his daughter. They remembered magazine interviews where he praised her looks with a tone that consistently raised eyebrows. They recalled radio conversations where he allowed others to speak about her in ways no father usually would. Even seemingly light-hearted talk show moments, like when he proudly mentioned kissing her as often as possible, only made those whispers grow louder. All of it was now sitting front and center on the stage. It's unspoken but undeniable, and Jasmine Crockett had masterfully placed it there. Ivanka tried desperately to shift the conversation, moving her words toward policy, toward broader themes, anything that would pull the audience's attention back to safer, more familiar ground. But it was futile. The tension in the room was no longer about abstract politics. It was about presence, power, and perception. Every attempt to steer the conversation felt like paddling against an overwhelming current. Jasmine had turned the tide and Ivanka was caught hopelessly in its powerful flow. The host cleared his throat, a nervous sound, attempting to regain control. He asked a question about unity, about leadership, hoping to smooth over the jagged edges of the exchange. But even his voice sounded frail against the immense weight of what had just happened. Everyone knew the moment had already passed. The balance had already shifted. Jasmine Crockett remained calm, composed, almost serene, while Ivanka Trump, typically the epitome of poise, was now visibly on the defensive. And the audience felt it. They sensed it. They could see it playing out before their eyes. A power dynamic visibly unraveling, one sharp remark undoing years of carefully constructed image. It wouldn't matter how Ivanka answered the next question or the one after that. What people would remember was this singular moment, the exact second her control slipped away and the second Jasmine claimed the room, and it had all begun with one question Ivanka never saw coming. The air in the studio remained thick with tension, but an undeniable shift had occurred. Ivanka's confidence had visibly cracked and the audience was no longer hanging on her every word. Instead, all eyes were fixed on Jasmine Crockett. Host, sensing the immense weight of the moment, leaned forward, his voice soft, almost deferential. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began. "How would you like to respond now?" It was an open invitation, a chance to either escalate the confrontation or to ground the conversation. Jasmine took her time, unhurried. She glanced at the host, then back at Ivanka, and finally to the audience. Her voice, steady, calm, and unmistakably clear, finally broke the silence. "You know, Ivanka can say whatever she wants, but let's be real here. We're all Americans. No matter what narrative she tries to paint on this stage tonight, I stand here proud and rightful, demanding the respect every citizen inherently deserves." The words resonated across the studio like a clear bell. The previously quiet audience erupted into murmurs of agreement. Some nodded their heads, others clapped softly, and a few even let out low, affirming cheers. It wasn't a loud, chaotic outburst, but rather the powerful sound of recognition. The sound of truth connecting deeply with people. Jasmine continued, her tone gaining strength but never losing its composure. "See, this isn't about me going somewhere else to understand my country. My roots are here, my people are here, my story, our story, is etched into the very streets of America, in the communities that built this nation, and I categorically refuse to let anyone make me feel like a guest." In my own home, every word felt like a direct, unstated rebuttal to Ivanka's earlier remark. Yet, without needing to point a finger, Jasmine didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to resort to insults. Her power resided in her unwavering clarity, in her absolute refusal to shrink. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking once more on Ivanka, an undeniable challenge in her gaze. This table, this stage, this nation, they belong to all of us. Not because of family names, not because of privilege, but because we are Americans, and every one of us deserves to be respected as such. The audience erupted. A thunderous applause filled the room, louder this time, finally breaking the suffocating tension that had gripped the studio for so long. Some rose from their seats, clapping with fervent conviction. The energy in the room was no longer heavy. It was incandescent, electric. Ivanka sat utterly frozen, her polished exterior visibly crumbling further with every cheer that poured in for Jasmine. For once, her usually calm, collected image appeared diminished, almost insignificant against the wave of support swelling around her opponent. The host tried to speak, but the sheer noise of the room made him pause. He glanced at Jasmine, then at Ivanka, and he knew with absolute certainty this moment was not his to control. It belonged to Jasmine now. Jasmine offered no smile of triumph, no hint of gloating. She simply sat back, her presence calm, her powerful words still resonating in the minds of everyone watching. She had said precisely what needed to be said, and she had left it there, standing firm on its own inherent strength, and the brilliance of it lay in its profound simplicity. Because while Ivanka had tried to cut Jasmine down with a mocking remark, Jasmine's response had soared above it all, sharper, stronger, and infinitely more lasting. She hadn't merely defended herself. She had redefined the entire conversation. The cameras panned across the audience one last time, capturing faces filled with thought, admiration, and deep reflection. People were no longer just witnessing a political exchange. They were watching a profound statement about who truly belongs in America, about who has the right to speak, to sit at the table, to demand respect. And as the show edged toward its conclusion, one truth lingered above all else. Jasmine Crockett had not only flipped the room, she had reminded everyone, from those on stage to those listening in the studio and beyond, that this country belongs to all of us. Not because of power, not because of family names, but simply because we are Americans.